So this morning we are in our series on the 7 days of creation, and we're looking at the days of creation as the recreation of our spirit. And, it's a creation story, and traditionally, or at least historically, a lot of people have thought that this was a story about the creation of our material universe. And it can be difficult to think of it that way, because the math doesn't seem to add up with what scientists want it to say, and certain things like light comes before the sources of light. We're going to get to it in a few days or a few weeks, where the sun and the stars are created before or after this light was created on day one. So how does that happen, where there's light and then the sources? There are some things in this creation story that feel out of place for being a natural creation story. And that's because it's more of a spiritual creation story. It's about how we are being created to be angels, going from being a merely natural human being that lives in this world and for this world alone, to somebody who lives in heaven, lives for heaven and for other people and for the Lord alone. For that to happen, you either need one of two things to happen. One possibility is that God could just choose. You get to go to hell. You get to go to heaven. Let's just erase your existence. If we're doing it that way, we could do whatever we want, right? If it's just arbitrary that God created people and is just choosing the elect, there's not much that we can do. There's not much use in our participation because it wouldn't matter. But there's another option. The other option is that the Lord can give us a choice. The Lord can give us all possibility to do with ourselves, our bodies, the things we have at our possession while we're in this world, to do whatever we want with it. And then to see if we desire to use those things to do worldly things, selfish things, or heavenly things. It's the same materials with most of the things that we do while we're here. And yet, we can have heavenly results and we can have hellish results. Even with actions that we would deem evil, we can find ways to put that same act into different categories. Take somebody who kills another person, takes their life. Can we categorically say that that person deserves to go to hell? Anyone want to venture and categorically put them into heaven or hell based on that amount of information? We can't, can we? Even in society, we kind of look at the reasons why seem to matter. The reason why somebody does. If it's just, I really don't care about their life and I need what they have, I can kill them to take it, that might be one determination. That's one category. But what if somebody is really protecting themselves or their loved ones or their country? We put that into a different category, don't we? In fact, some spots in the writings talk about how this is an act of charity for soldiers when it's actually a part of what they're supposed to be doing as a part of their protection. If their heart is in the right place, that act itself can be a form of charity. How strange. Making determinations about what in this world is good versus evil is really hard, and it seems easy at the same time. We want to have these two categories, and most things do seem to fall into those categories. Most of the time we can say, well, murder, evil. Murder's different than killing, though, isn't it? Because killing could have that other possibility. But if it's just murder, we go murder, evil, giving life, creating life, good, right? It's pretty easy categories. Lying, bad idea. Truth-telling, good idea. Is there a middle ground? Ooh. What if I think I can make something good happen if I tell a little white lie? Or I can maybe preserve somebody's feelings by not being fully honest? What do we do in that middle ground when we aren't sure whether it's the right thing to tell a white lie or to not? We have categories, and most of the time we feel like they are very distinct, like the Lord just separated them. We have the waters above, and we have the waters below. And so shouldn't everybody be able to make these determinations of what's heavenly versus what's earthly? Well, that's murder, that's giving life. And then we have all of that junk in the margins, when we might tell a white lie, or when we might take a medicine that our child needed that we didn't have money for. That's another issue with our scruples. Is it okay to steal a medicine for your child if they're sick and you don't have the money for it? All of these hard questions where we end up with having to justify our own belief system. And this is what day 2 is really about, is how are we justifying what we do and what we think and what we say? Because it's a good thing that we aren't judged based on what's in our minds. Because the thoughts that come in, I hope I'm not the only one that sits here and goes, man, why are there a huge combination? It's just a mixed bag of bad ideas and good ideas, and they're all mixed together. And sometimes I have preferences for bad ideas. I think all of us kind of do. Sometimes we have preferences for bad ideas and we know they're bad ideas. And we still kind of go, yeah, but I want to. And can't I get away with that little bad idea if I do enough good over here? You might have heard the expression that life is lived in the margins. And that's really what we're talking about today, is not all of those big things that we feel are obvious to us, what's good versus evil, what's true versus false. But what about those really tough decisions? In the Gospel of John, when John is approached and is asked by his disciples about Jesus' baptism, he's kind of like, well, this should be an obvious game. And he starts off with sharing that easy game. He says, well, this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved the darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. This is a pretty useful little quote here if we think about, especially those decisions we make on the margins. What do we do if we're unsure, if this issue is a good thing for me to do or a bad thing? And yet we have to make a choice. There are a lot of times where we have no choice but to make a choice. What is this suggesting that we do? There already was this light on day 1. The Lord said, let there be light. And when he says, let there be light, we might think about how this gains or gives us our awareness of all things. Everything that we become aware of is fit into that commandment or that proclamation, let there be light. We can learn things in the natural world. We can learn things in the Lord's Word. We can learn things by experience. Everything that we take in is according to that expression, let there be light, because it has to do with the light of our understanding. We can see objects with our eyes, but then we understand them with our minds. We can see ideas with our minds, but then we live them in our life. So what happens here if we're evil, if we're stuck in some bad ways or false ideas? It says that most of the people that are doing evil, they hide from the light. They don't want to be exposed. So what happens if we're living life and we're gathering all of this stuff from the things that we see, and we just get to a point where we go, well, I like this, enough to say, that's my life. And it's whatever we feel feels good. We like the taste of sweet sugar and bread, and so we eat it all. Or we like the pleasures of physical relations, so we can do that all we want. We don't have to worry about marriage. That's not important to think about yet. To come out into the light as somebody who chooses to be promiscuous because it's fun, they might not care. But they also might be afraid of how people look at them. This passage, John is saying that most of the time, if we're in evil, we are going to hide from that light. We're going to avoid reading the Word. We're going to avoid going to church. We're going to avoid prayer. We're going to avoid those things because it will expose our hypocrisy if there is something good inside. But what if we actually want to be better people? Where it's not about justifying how I behave or how I live according to the Word, and that's why we go to the Word to find, is this okay for me to do? No. Oh, darn. How can I fix it? What if we want to change and we just don't know yet? We don't know the right answer yet. John is saying those who are good come into the light so that their deeds may be exposed that they are from God. So we're told here to act in our uncertainty with the hope that it is good and the humility to check ourselves if it isn't. And that's the uncomfortable part about life. There are things we know are good, and we're going to do them, and we'll be proud of those things, and they'll make us feel good. And other people will look at those things and go, man, they're a good person. And then there's all the bad things that we hide, and we don't show other people, so nobody else can see it to say they're a bad person. But then there's all the stuff in the middle. What do we do with all that stuff in the middle? And the Lord is saying, lift it up into that light. Try to bring it up to heaven in the way that you think it might be. If you think this idea is heavenly and that it is going to serve God's kingdom and His people, we're supposed to do it to find out the quality. To not wait until we are certain that we're right, but to do it to find out its essential quality. Well, listen to how the Arcana Celestia from the Heavenly Doctrine speaks about this day 2. It says, number 24, the next step, meaning after day 1 or after we are aware of things in our surroundings, the next step occurs after the Spirit of God, that is the Lord's mercy, brings out into daylight the knowledge of truth and goodness, and provides the first glimmering that the Lord exists, and that He is goodness and truth itself, and that nothing is good or true except what comes from Him. The Spirit of God then makes a distinction between the inner and outer beings, and between the religious knowledge we possess in our inner selves and the secular belonging to, secular knowledge belonging to our outer selves. The inner self is called the expanse or the firmament. The knowledge in the inner self is called the waters that are above the expanse or firmament. And then the facts that belong to our outer self are called the waters under that expanse. So here we get our specific categories, those things that we would consider heavenly versus those things that are much more worldly. And the Lord makes this distinction. In our story, the Lord is the one doing these acts, right? It says, let there be light, and there was light. It's the Lord thinking about it and then saying, well, let's do the next thing. After there is light, the Lord says, let there be a firmament, a firm distinction between the waters, between the things of this world and the things that are purely heavenly. It doesn't mean that the things down here are bad. It means that they pertain to this world, and that there are higher things that we can aspire to and serve by means of the lower ones. But who makes the determination? Who makes the distinction? The Lord makes that distinction between what is right and wrong, between what's good and evil. And this is obvious, right? But I want us to think about when we're making these decisions, that firmament, if you imagine it being just like this membrane kind of, there's a distinct difference between what's below and what's above, and what's below and what's above. There's nothing, it seems like there's nothing between them. But that border, what determines that? It's the Lord's word itself. How do we categorize the information that we take into our lives? The Lord's word gives us the categories. So as we read and we learn more about what's supposed to fit into heaven, we take all of our ideas that we learn in our experience when we're reading, when we're learning other things, and we go, can that contribute to heaven? Can that contribute to my life that's leading to heaven? Can it contribute to other people's lives? It doesn't matter how mundane the fact or the idea is, if it can be raised to uses in heaven. And just like heavenly ideas, if you want to know what's in here, we have rubbing alcohol up top, and we have vegetable oil in the middle, and we have some water that's colored green in the bottom. So the alcohol here is lighter. Those ideas are always going to rise. Once we know there are ideas that are heavenly and we grab onto them and we live them, it actually elevates us with those ideas. This is the Lord's draw. It is the stream of his providence. When we learn ideas that are from heaven, we put them into the category of heaven and then choose to do them because they're heavenly. And then just like a balloon that pulls us up, we get enough of those stacked together, it might raise us up into the atmosphere. But think about helium balloons, all of the true ideas that are heavenly, that can just draw us up. Those are the ones that the Lord is saying are above the firmament. And the ones that remain here, that drag us back down to mundane, worldly, secular thinking, even if we think they're spiritual ideas, if we're using them to serve natural needs, it drags them down. The Lord makes this distinction between worldly things and heavenly things so that we can then categorize everything that we know into those slots and then choose between them. Do we want to come into the light, have those things exposed, and then be raised up? Or do we want to stay out of the light and remain here, present in this world, ignorant of spiritual things? This is where we're at day 2. We've gotten day 1. We are exposed to ideas. Let there be light. Day 2 has to do with making distinctions, categorizing things between what's really good and what's really not so much, especially on the margins, where we have challenges to go, this isn't something we sidestep because it seems like a little thing. Let's really dig down. What about this is heavenly, and what about this is earthly? And to close this with an idea that's much more biblical, this is what John the Baptist tells us to do when he talks about himself. When he's talking about the joy that we should have in living the way that the Lord is, it's talking about that symbolically in the Lord being the bridegroom to the bride, that we are that bride as his church, that when we choose to think about those heavenly ideas and live them, to put them up as a category above, that we should be rejoicing when the lower things are brought down. John says, "He who has the bride is the bridegroom. But the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is fulfilled." Oh, can we get to a point where our natural being is just going, oh, I am so happy to be free of that addiction. I am so happy to be free of gossiping. I am so happy to be free of that tendency to lash out, of that anger. I'm so happy to be out of that because we see something better. And so John says, he must increase, but I must decrease. And this is a great little thing to keep in our back pocket, in our minds, when we're making those determinations, those distinctions. I must decrease, and he must increase. Amen. Please rise.